The first question, smash open, was tradition is the passing on of fire, not the worship of ashes. सबसे पहले we need to define what we mean by tradition, and the keywords to focus on this essay are fire and ashes. Okay, and there are various interpretations you can give to fire. Hot, fire is something which is life. We are hot, so we have life. Fire is something which burns you. All these things. But as you get more mature with the essay, you will take the highest, most expansive मतलब वो वाली interpretation जो कि ज़्यादा फैला सकते हो. अगर सिर्फ hot बोल दोगे fire को, there is not much else you can talk about it. But if you equate fire to life, then there's a lot of attributes you can give to fire. And ashes to something which was once fire, or once a derivative, or once part of this whole ensemble, fire with logs of wood, but now is khatam. Okay? Ashes is like the sum total of everything which has gone past its life and is lying out there in the Havan Kund. That's the imagery which would come. Tradition also will evoke the religious side of, whatever you understand by traditions and rituals, but try to have a more secular aspect of tradition in your head as we brainstorm. ठीक है, कभी भी ऐसा लगे तुम लोगों को who are live that I'm moving fast, bear with it. Let me know in the chat कुछ समझ में ना आए, but like just bear with it as you get into this, a faster highway of understanding essay writing in reflective mode. So first of all, you have to define tradition not as a definition, but give its place in your civilization's history. In our life, give tradition a place. It's not everything, but it has a place. And you can call tradition as a civilization memory. Okay? There is a famous thinker called Edmund Burke, and his famous line is that society is a partnership between the dead, the living, and those yet to be born. This line, this one-liner quote, you can put it in your environmental GS answers. You can put in essays which have environmental dimension to it. You can also put it in questions, in essays where history is being harped back to, or traditions are being called, or things of the past are being called, to synthesize together. So that is what you will give to society. Because society is a conversation between the past, the present, and those who are yet to be born. And this is like the central theme of how you take tradition forward. Okay? When we think of traditions, दिमाग में एग्जाम्पल्स में आएंगे द गुरु शिष्य परंपरा. यू विल हैव ट्रेडिशंस ऑफ म्यूजिक के घराने. यू विल हैव ट्रेडिशंस ऑफ द फायर ऑफ ज़ोरोस्ट्रियनिज्म, राइट? ठीक है, they have fire which that's what they have, the fire god which they worship, and they make sure that it's lit up all the time. You have these akhand deepaks in many of the ashrams and mutts also. और कहाँ, और what comes to your mind when you think of traditions? Write that thing down. ठीक है. Then we go into so we define that tradition की importance है. It's one of the key things which helps us dialogue between the past and the future, mediated by the present. उसके बाद we'll go that there has to be a rule with which we sort what is the worthy thing in the tradition to keep and what is to be discarded. Whenever in any essay you have to debate on, is it still worthy of my society's discussion, or is it a thing of the past? Always think of the philosophical fundamental of whatever that thing is that you're talking about. Nationalism versus patriotism, the difference will come when you understand the philosophy. Traditions versus traditionalism, again, understand the philosophy. Whenever you have to argue between conservative, orthodox, and liberal modern people, understand the philosophy which stays constant and things which are temporal. ये समझ में आता है? Even if you do not know what are the constituents, but this is how you have to differentiate. मतलब this is how you have to train your mind. ठीक है? So, and write down whatever interesting one-liners you get from this discussion. You have to now figure out a rule with which you sort something which is dead versus something which is still alive and worth transmitting it to the next generation. That's how your essay should proceed. Yeah, tradition is a guide and not a jailer. That's Somerset Maugham. Correct. So I'll take one example and I'll show you how over time that one quality has changed its flavor or its vibe, so as to say. एक तो तुम्हें पता है, Aristotle was a famous thinker who coined this word called forensis, where he judged the validity of something in only one aspect. Is it practical, and is it practical to life or not? a random theory in silo is not practical to life, so उसने इतनी तवज्जो नहीं दी है, ठीक है? And something which is just hasty action, which is just some ephemeral जोश और ये सब उसको भी नहीं दिए. The only midpoint that Aristotle put was the forensis, and he used to judge every activity by its end, the telos, ठीक है? जो ये कहते थे, the purpose it fulfills. But interesting virtue here to think is that of ahimsa. So ahimsa continues to inspire ethical politics across centuries, even though its practice has evolved from spiritual discipline. Ahimsa was a spiritual discipline, especially in the Jain tradition, to Gandhi Satyagraha. So you will see how ahimsa and such virtues are worth calling your own tradition. Okay? Your Indian tradition would have these as the hallmark virtues, which you will see that across the generations they have enthused different movements, societal movements, political movement, ethical debates, constitutional debates, and whatnot. Another thing that you need to think when it comes is how Constitution of India has evolved over time. Okay, we have not been rigid that whatever has been written by the forefathers should stay the same. It is no. We always argue about the spirit of the Constitution, and that is why there is a very famous ethical term which you use in the ethics paper. Tell me what that is. Ethical moralities. I hope you know what that ethical morality as a term is, right? Okay, so this is going to be a second block. Pehla block tha, you define tradition, you put tradition in the right perspective. Second block is you define or you talk about how do I sift between fire and ashes technically. Okay. The third block is that there is a time element into all these things. Okay. So when you write, and you can write it in your own language and in your own ways and with your own examples, but what you have to show is that the same practice can actually serve a generation, and if you do not think through it, it will become a burden for the next generation. Okay. When you do this, you avoid giving a binary, this was good, this is bad. No, you will say it was good but valid in a certain time and it's not valid now anymore. This is a more mature way of talking about how I'm seeing changes through generations, rather than just saying, hey, this is bad and this is good. That is almost trivializing something because you can. Don't go for that. And an interesting case, an interesting example here would be how, you in the health system, you see the revival of all the traditional ways of growing wheat, millet, and all those grains which have come, and they've taken a part of the national missions as well, right? Millet is a big thing, right? Even in our national missions. So, तुम बताओगे कि how, because of the evolving realities of the world we live in, climate resilience, resilient crop चाहिए, we want to be more atmanirbhar, etc. We are relooking at how the world, how India used to eat in past, the health benefits, and they are coming back again. Okay? So in that way, you give a sense of कि there is a constant flux of things, and each generation starts to discover what was useful, what was then discarded, is that discarding still legitimate or not, and then we bring it back. It's a very positive outlook towards re-evaluating your own past. Okay, so once you've done this much, then the next step would be a counter which should come to your head that, why can't we just start afresh? Why do we have to look back into the past? Why do we have to reevaluate whatever? Why can't we just start afresh? Start from t is equal to 0 as 2026. Tell me why that's not feasible. Tum log batao why that's not a most feasible thing. And what one-liners come to your mind when you think of something who derives wisdom from the past and does something forward? Take a moment, think of quotes or anecdotes where scientists have credited, their predecessors back. So, एक तो बहुत simple है. You have quotes like, I did something big because I stood on the shoulder of the giants. Okay? You stand on the good stuff which your past has built, and then you, over top of that, you build something of the future, right? So you don't boil the ocean again. You picked up the right things, and then there is merit in doing that. Now, the way to explain this further, the way to prove this point further is that, like I said, philosophically, all these ideas of how do we argue, logic was coined by Aristotle, right? Aristotle is credited to have coined logic back in the days when, it's kind of a big thing. And we've inherited those logical ways of arguments till now. And so even when we have discarded certain Aristotle's ideas, it's because they did not stand the test of logic. So in this way, this tradition puts more value on these finer virtues, finer aspects of life, rather than even your past gurus or past thinkers or people who you would worship otherwise. You understand this point? This is a very philosophical and finer point. We give more values to these ways of life, to the inquiries, to doubt, more than we give value to the people specific things or the institution specific things, because they come and go, but these ideas, these ways of being survive. Okay? That is why when we say that why don't we start afresh, we are missing that it's not starting afresh, we're inheriting those ideas in a way, right? So it's a very childish thing to say that let's just start afresh. Good point by someone on chat. Practice earns the name tradition only when it can survive both change and scrutiny. Okay? And it's a great line you can actually put in your essay. And whenever you get into these discussions with me, think of not just this specific essay topic, think of also places where you can apply these ideas, right? So there was a PYQ where I think the days don't know which the year, something like that, right? Days and years were being compared. Do you remember that PYQ? The days can't tell what the years go by, something to that account. It's a UPSC PYQ. It's the same thing. Replace tradition with the wisdom of elders, and you can use the same liner that a wisdom earns the, or whatever, advice earns the name wisdom only when it can survive both change and scrutiny. That would be like a great addition to that. Okay? All the discussions that you have with me in the essay and ethics, try to see and sit with them and write the one-liners right now in the live essay class. ठीक है, इसको दोबारा तुम नहीं देखने वाले हो. Do not give yourself this चूरन कि इसको आराम से देखेंगे, दोबारा YouTube पे अपलोड होगा, कोई नहीं देखने वाला. ठीक है, अभी जितना दिमाग में रह जाएगा, that's all. That's going to go in your subconscious memory. It will come out when you write the next essay. ठीक है, ये समझ में आ गया? 4 paragraphs. And when I say paragraphs, I mean 4 ideas which you carry forward, and it almost looks like a logical flow, right? Then we talk about what is the right way to define fire. मतलब who defines fire? Who calls something as a fire and something as an ash? That's also an interesting question, right? मतलब both sides of the camps will come up and say that no, I think this is fire. The conservative folks or the orthodox folks will say no, things need to do exactly the way they were, and that's still fire. And I would argue and say that nahi bhai, in this modern day and age something has changed. So tell me, what defines, who gets the authority to define what is fire, and which philosopher comes to your mind when it's about who gets to define something? Truth kya hai, kaun batayega? Which philosopher comes to your mind? So in this you can go slightly wide. You can go and talk about it's either the collective conscious will, okay, or it is one of those leaders who are able to not go with the flow like dead fishes go, take a step back and see if those traditional things are fossiled values or are they still living and therefore are changing. Therefore the same thing, that is it surviving the scrutiny? Can I still ask a question and there will be someone who will answer this, or is it more like a hierarchical thing that just go with this, there is no way you can challenge this? So then you remind yourself of philosophers, thinkers like B.R. Ambedkar, Jyotirao Phule and Michel Foucault. Yes, that guy comes in. Okay? That knowledge and power often shape each other. Knowledge matlab truth, knowledge matlab wisdom, knowledge matlab parts of tradition which are still live, those kind of things. And now once you introduce power, once you introduce this thing that कौन बताता है कि क्या है fire, क्या है ash? Either it's a collective will, either it's a collective dialogue, then to that society is good, it's an open society. But if it's not, if it's just a small clique of people, then you have a concentrated power. Then what happens? Then the very next step is you call it a sacred thing, right? And then that sacredness becomes a shield against criticism. Whenever you call something sacred, you put it on a higher pedestal. Now you cannot question it. You can only question it through a certain means, through a certain logic, through a certain law. And एक सवाल आया था ना, master's tool can never dismantle the master's house. Then you cannot ever go against that, right? Then you have a very defined pathway of going about it. So then again, that tradition stops becoming a living entity. It becomes more of a traditionalist tool to control the masses in the garb of something which is held sacred. Now, when you have argued against tradition which is held by power structures, then one of the biggest argument which comes is that the reason why we are not able to sift through fire and ash in the right way is because some people play a trump card of age. ठीक है, age not just of the person who is holding a conservative or orthodox outlook, but also age as in like, you know, this thing has been going on for centuries and ages and you cannot change it. ठीक है, and there you show the issues with that age thing. You show how something which because of ignorance, because of other things, was held right in a certain age, like slavery. A lot of, I think, the first presidents of America and certain political leaders of America also held slaves even when America was independent, is not right because now new ideas are coming. ठीक है, तो वही scrutiny वाला जो new ideas are coming. So tradition is just one part of the whole life. Life has influx of new ideas which come because of mixing of civilizations, because of just new ways of being, because of technology, and you start assessing your life again. Okay, so new ideas come, your old ideas get challenged, something which is part of the tradition gets relooked, and you realize it doesn't stand the test of scrutiny. When this happens, do not give me the false context of, hey, it's an age-old tradition, it's an age-old thing, you're defying your elders, वगैरह 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 वगैरह. ठीक है, an example is slave trade. और कौन सा example याद आता है? And there's an interesting word that again you need to know. So Stuart Mill का एक काफ़ी interesting one-liner है that inherited opinion deserve examination and not automatic obedience. So I'll share these model answers to you in the Smash essay group, and as you go through it, underline all the one-liners, underline all these pair of words. ठीक है, the reason why is that they qualify something which is considered to be a universal virtue, but तुम यहाँ पे बोल रहे हो automatic मत करो, give it a deliberate obedience. When you engage in a lot of such words, तो तुम्हारा खुद का रिफ्लेक्शन बेटर हो जाएगा. ठीक है, and this will give you, it will take your essay to a different trajectory. ठीक है, this is like a hack, like a shortcut, क्योंकि you know what you're saying. Tyranny का भी एक, there's a very famous book, Tyranny, by some author Snyder. उसमें भी यही है that, you know, politicians want your automatic obedience. Don't do that. Obedience is something that you have as a value. It's a good thing. Save it. It's a sacred thing. Save it. Do not just give it automatically. Test the process, test the system, test the person, and then gradually give it. Understand this nuance and use these in your words. ठीक है? Informed courage is another such thing. अभी patience and paralysis वाला essay आएगा. That's one word you should write there. और क्या है? There's a very famous thinker called Karl Popper. ठीक है? He gave this term called open societies because every institution in an open society is open to criticism. If that doesn't happen, if you give me a sacred wala flag, you remove the criticism, sooner or later that thing is going to disintegrate. Okay, cool. What else? So you've talked about कि sacred मत बनाओ फालतू में. If there's a legit criticism, go through it completely. Don't put age as a flag or a jumla कि अरे चलते आ रहे. Now you go a little deeper into the psyche of people who argue like these, who let you not sift between fire and ash in the right objective way. ठीक है, it's anyway a subjective principle, but लोग फिर भी क्यों फंसते हैं? Because they have a fear. Because more or less the defense of a tradition in an old school way is a fear which is manifesting itself. ठीक है, and fear manifests itself not as fear but as loyalty, and it's an important thing to to discriminate between these two words. ठीक है, fear and loyalty, they wear the same faces. तो ये चीज़ें you will see a lot in ethics, where two values which look very opposite but actually in the spectrum they stand very side to side. ठीक है, they're also very positive, but the negative part of them, if you stretch the positive side a little further, the negative thing comes in. Loyalty is a good virtue. ठीक है, but if you're just loyal and you're not asking even the right questions, then that's because either you're fearful of the master, so it's a very uneven system, or you've lost your critical thinking abilities. ठीक है, same way in the second topic, patience and paralysis, dwell more on such things because they'll give you the right nuance to argue the dialogue. ठीक है, and why does loyalty gets confused with this fear? It's because of the comfort of certainty which we have been through. Okay, so that comfort of certainty prevents you from asking the right questions, which and you justify all that in the garb of loyalty. तो ये ध्यान रखो, इसको लिख लो. Cool. अब हमने इतना सब कुछ कर लिया है, now is the time where you give some kind of a synthesis or some kind of the next step. And when I say synthesis in essays like these, it's like you take a higher dimension now. ठीक है? So you say that if tradition का तत्व is about keeping your identity intact, keeping your true identity intact, the lowest common denominator of who you are, let's say Indian वगैरह, then the only way identity gets kept intact is when it survives these questions, because otherwise there's a lot of noise which keeps coming as you live your life. You have to retain that ability to remove the noise from what is the right signal. So separating fire from the ashes is actually doing justice to not just tradition but the identity. Tradition क्या है? It's basically a marker for your identity, right? That's the thing at stake. So identity को बचाना है तो you have to keep having the dialogue. ये समझ में आया? And in doing this, there's a lot of Japanese examples that you can bring forth. ठीक है? नई नई चीज़ों में जब Japanese they tinker and then harp back to an old value which they value a lot or they keep sacred. So they do a lot of these things. There's another interesting one-liner. Every generation must inherit, not merely imitate. So if you want to show down, if you want to diss at the people who are not ready to pay heed to the call of this essay ka topic, you basically can say that you're just imitating, you're just copy pasting. You're not inspired by whatever was the past. You can actually challenge their authority or their supposed hold over what was sacred or what is past by saying that you're just imitating and copying and just repeating rather than being inspired by it and challenging. And if they argue back with you, or if you have to further put this claim properly on the paper, then you say that the ancient rishis or seers or the first thinkers were inspired by the day and age as to why something to be done that way versus not this way. They had inspired visions. They were not borrowing from something. They were sitting there figuring out the best way to lead this life in that space and time, which is what's the duty of every generation. Did you get this? This is also a very important point. And if you are slightly more interested in philosophy, Indian, whatever, you'll realize that if you read the dialogues or the dialogues in Upanishad, Nachiket, Maitri, Samvad, or even the standalone shloks, agar tum padhoge, they're very inspired visions, very abstract, almost like mathematics and pure physics and pure maths, almost very abstract in their own ways. And you can spend minutes if not hours and just thinking about ये कोई कैसे सोच सकता है. This is making sense. We're at the end of this first essay. ठीक है? And the idea is that there's बहुत ही famous quote है by a guy called Pelikan, and he said that tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the death faith of the living. Did you get this? Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. These are the lines on which you can end your essays, or you should end your essays on such things. Okay, note this line, and you can use it for different context. I mean, you can use your own creativity and change this one-liner. I talked about the Indian Constitution. That's a more tangible aspect of how continuity is kept intact, because some things are kept intact where other things are changed. All these things you have to put in your synthesis. In your synthesis, in essays like these where we're talking about tradition, wisdom, old customs, ways of life, you kind of have to allay the fear in the synthesis. कि ऐसा नहीं है कि we are disrupting the whole matrix. We're just doing extra legwork to ensure that the core stays true. ठीक है? So you're aligning the fear and the loyalty wala jo false premise hai here in this synthesis. Cool hai? This makes sense to everyone? Yeah, that's nice. That's a nice synthesis ka end. If you've mentioned these points in your essay, and you can mention these points whenever there's a debate between history and future, or old ways of doing things and new ways of doing things, technology including, that there's a topic which comes to you which is about whatever technology is going to erode all the values or this and that, तो तुम वहाँ पे भी ये argue कर सकते हो that technology is just going to show you the mirror, probably a little more faster, but it's just going to show you the human mirror of the present time. So you still can take a step back and think कि इसमें से कितनी चीज़ें रखनी कितनी हटानी है. ठीक है? We spent a lot of time on this essay because it was important. and even though I've done this in the offline, I'm मान के चल रहा हूँ कि अगर offline के बंदे भी ये देखेंगे तो they'll get extra points just from this. Okay, the second topic, patience and paralysis wear the same face. Now an exercise for you guys who are attending this live on Zoom, tell me some of these other pair of words which are very close to each other but actually stand for very different things, but outwardly when you see they appear the same. Patience and paralysis, when you see from a third person point of view, they appear the same. ऐसे और कौन कौन से वर्ड्स हैं जो दिमाग में आते हैं? Feel free to use ChatGPT, Claude right now. There is no other way to learn. Okay, needs and wants, absolutely correct. Action versus an action तो दिख जाता है ना कि तुम एक्ट कर रहे हो या इनएक्ट कर रहे हो. नहीं. Needs versus want, demand and desire, correct. Peace and panic, purpose and pause. Okay, yeah, feel free and give your raw answers. Don't have to have polished answers. You're going on the right path. The principle is that to a third person it would appear same, to the society it would appear same, but only you would know the difference. And that's the main thing of this topic. Life and livelihood. Kaise Medhavi? How is life and livelihood looking the same but is actually different? Equanimity and numbness, correct. Sympathy or empathy तो दिख जाती है यार. In action, sympathy or empathy actually is a thing in action. If you empathize with someone, then you step into their shoes, your whole body and your whole vibe changes. Sympathy is something which is still a little colder aspect. So it's like it is still on the same path. It's an escalation of one thing leading to another. Okay? One is indifference, then it's sympathy, then empathy, then skin in the game. Okay? These are like concept ladders. Patience and paralysis are the things which appear same, and they can equally also confuse the holder of this thing. And patience and paralysis is a mid stage. So when you think more about such essays, and in any essay, routine and addiction is a good thing, correct. Compassion and complacency, great, that's also thing. Awesome. So all these essays which will be inspired by something from the ethics, and they'll have this kind of depth. Okay. इसका निवारण सिर्फ टाइम, स्पेस एंड टाइम में होता है, टेक्निकली स्पीकिंग. सो यू गिव इनफ टाइम एंड यू रियलाइज इफ दैट गाय वाज पेशेंट और वाज ही जस्ट पैरालाइज्ड और काइंड ऑफ फ्लमक्स्ड बाय द होल सिचुएशन, बिकॉज ऑल ऑफ दिस इज लीडिंग यू टू द नेक्स्ट स्टेज विच इज ऑफ व्हेन डू यू एक्ट और हाउ लॉन्ग डू यू स्टे इन द इनएक्शन. ठीक है. सो this is not about delay, it's about the right preparation, it's about not acting in haste. So you kind of पहले paragraph में या second paragraph में write about what is it that this topic is trying to get you into. It's basically about choosing the right moment. So Tolstoy का एक quote है बहुत famous, the two most powerful warriors are patience and time. So this topic is from there we start. Okay. Because speed without understanding will magnify the mistake. Hustle culture is not the only thing which is of highest virtue, but speed without understanding will magnify the mistake. To prove your point, you can give the example of Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay. I know I've taught you the Amazon's का वो 2-door problem and 1-door problem, but अभी इसी पे रहना. ठीक है. Don't go into the means versus end वाला, उससे मत जाना. ठीक है. So you've defended the practice of patience. You quickly show the cost of not being patient, the cost of being opposite. Okay. Once you show that, you establish both the counter view, the view and the counter view. Now when you go to the third, तब तुम बताओगे why do we confuse patience and paralysis as one? Because this judgment is about judging your inner constitution, not your outward stillness. Okay. So a passive person merely postpones responsibility. ठीक है. A patient person is observing, strengthening, and learning and preparing and all those things. Again, a very interesting example that you can give here is Michelangelo carving David, and you can say that it took his while. He studied different stones. What stone would give him the best manifestation of the vision that he has in his mind? And this would harp back to one of the topics of essay. The idol is already in the stone. Blaise Pascal की एक बहुत famous observation है, which is that many human problems arise from the inability to sit quietly. And so quietness is in itself not inactivity. It's a lot of activity. It's going inside your head. ठीक है. There's an interesting word play here that you should note, which is of moral discipline is greater than political speed. Gandhi's decision to hold off the Satyagraha, to hold off that movement, NCM, non-cooperation movement, among other things, you can use that example, but you can also use that example with this. For Gandhi, moral discipline was more important than political speed. So you can say that Gandhi was more patient with letting India warm up to the idea of the right way to go about Satyagraha and right way to imbibe ahimsa. समझ में आ रहा है? That's why I keep telling you, you can use the cliche example, but you have to think a lot on the mechanism कि क्या चल रहा होगा गांधी के माइंड में, क्या चल रहा होगा politicians के माइंड में, what were the thinking of the world of that era, लोग क्या सोच रहे होंगे, because that will give you an insight. Someone should write the topic on the chat. ठीक है. But you understand this? This is a way in which you can reuse the old examples and you can add a very nice X factor mechanism to it. That for Gandhi, when the violence erupted and he suspended the mass movement, for him, moral discipline mattered more than the political speed. Okay. So, itna ho gaya. Now you have to show me why, what is actually this paralysis that we're talking about. I can easily in binary say that it's bad and it's wrong and you should warn yourself against it. But what is the point where paralysis, where patience becomes paralysis? Okay. You can say this, paralysis is when patience has forgotten its purpose. Okay. There are two ways to tag a guy who has paralysis. Ek, he's just looking calm and he doesn't know how to solve a problem, so he's just looking calm. He's dead from the time t equal to 0. Second, you are patient, but you're patient, and with time you've just forgotten your purpose, or you've forgotten why you were patient for. So you're spending more time on being patient than just having a trigger and act. Okay. This is where you bring in those dimensions ki anxiety ho jati hai if you just wait. Not everyone can afford to be patient. Okay. Not everyone can afford to stay strong when competing ideas are coming. You understand this? There's a famous quote by Scott Fitzgerald that the mark of a high rate intelligence is to hold to competing opinions and still not lose the ability to act. अब ये बहुत ही idealistic statement है. Not everyone is able to pull this off. So you might start doing that, and then anxiety comes or other factors come, and you descend into paralysis. So this way you're telling the mechanism, and you can quote. If you can quote Kierkegaard, उसका भी ये dialogue है that anxiety often traps individuals in endless possibilities instead of decisive action. ठीक है. Patience becomes paralysis when waiting no longer increases the understanding. So that's like a practical cure for you. Share market example, correct, Roshan? You can give all the raw practical example of the modern day that you've seen. Okay. So what we are trying to do in such essay discussions is, rather than giving you a binary out, I am trying to tell you the tensions which people engage in. Okay. In doing that, I cannot just trivialize a certain segment of people कि वो बेवकूफ थे या उनको नहीं समझ में आया था. ठीक है. I don't, अभी नहीं चाहिए. I will give you the mechanism which was in their head while they were going about, and that's very important for you to understand right now. इसमें से जितना भी तुम पेपर में लिख पाओगे, that's a bonus for you. Any other example which comes to mind? Delay in judicial matters, correct? Right. So Martin Luther King's famous quote, "Justice long delayed is justice denied." That's patience versus paralysis. Comes from what Hume wrote. Okay. Global hesitation on the climate change. What has it done? There were some manageable risks, but now they have escalated into crisis. Right. So patience paralysis. You were waiting for the right technology, but maybe you could have mobilized the collective will of the people. Right. There is no just one single way of solving a problem. There could be different ways of solving a problem. Figure out which way is right in the current temporality that you're living in. Figure out which way is the right jugaad for now while you're waiting for the long-term solution to come. Okay. Which is what charity and justice thing also in a way. Synthesis is basically a wisdom wala line here. Okay. Synthesis basically because patience and paralysis is supposed to give way to something, right? So in the thesis and antithesis, you've already brought about action and inaction, right? That these two qualities eventually have to give way to acting on something. So synthesis now is all about what's the right time to act, what is the wisdom of right action, etc., etc. Okay, so while gathering inside, act it's a practical way that you should act when you're getting no net marginal utility from acting, waiting more, then you should start acting. Okay, the highest action is patient and the highest patience is active. In this way you merge these things together. ये हमने पिछले वाले ऐसे में भी किया था, dead faith of the living and living faith of the death. So you kind of add these things together. Okay, you say that the highest action is the patient action, and when you are patient, a lot of action, a lot of activity keeps going in your head or in your judgment making. ये समझ में आ रहा है? This is what is accorded to Rahul Dravid or all such actors or all such athletes who appear calm in the field, but they're always looking for the right way to put the right guy in the field, etc., give the right bowling attack to someone. That's what they're doing. They're okay with losing some runs on a particular bowler so that slog overs में they have the right bowler there. Okay, Bhagavad Gita gives you this amazing amalgamation of buddhi and karma. So Vivek, I think the right Sanskrit thing was Vivek and karma should go hand in hand. I'm forgetting that thing, the right phrase, but yeah, that's the thing. Depends. Roshan, when you say that, can we say it depends on the circumstances? Speed may lead to rash decisions sometimes, and patient capital and long-term trap result. All that you've already said. All that you've already said before. In the synthesis, you kind of now talk about how these things act together, and not in one way, not in a sequence, but they are like overlapping each other. And you give examples to prove yourself. Okay, जैसे Apple का iPhone was not the first iPhone, was not the first smartphone to come in the market. But you can say that it was the right time where, according to Jobs' vision, the right technology was available at the right price. And so that was the right time to launch a smartphone. Okay? As you see now also, right? Apple, which is the marquee company, decides its own time to enter a market for a certain thing. Abhi tak flip phone nahi bana hai Apple ka. Maybe that's not the right time. And I don't think Samsung flip phone is a rage, right? This is where your synthesis is about this thing. That life rewards or the wisdom is about informed courage and not perfect certainty. Okay? So, Med Roshan, did you get the answer? Again, note down these words, these duopoly of words, or these two words juxtaposing with each other. Informed courage and not perfect certainty. Okay? You have to take a higher side, Roshan. Synthesis is always on a higher ground. Okay? So then wisdom requires reflective minds and hearts, etc., right? So you build on top of this. Now, a very famous visual of patience and paralysis, or of a patient warrior, is that of an archer, right? An archer doesn't release the arrow the moment it touches the bow string, right? He waits, he listens to the wood getting taut, to the string being tight at a certain level, the angle, and he feels his thumb, right? He feels when is the right time to release the arrow, when is the most optimum time, and then he releases or she releases, right? So that's a very famous visual of archer that you can. Sniper is one such thing. All these focus sports, all these focus warrior tactics, that's where you have to go. The topic 3 is every machine saves labor and taxes abilities. This is an easy topic, so you can just read through the model answer yourself. I won't go in there. The topic 4 is the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. Now, it's also an easy one, and this has been often asked in the paper. The thing that you have to do here is go deep into these words, sacred and faithful, because it's a pre-synthesized topic. The more you go deep into this, you have to caution the reader कि भाई ये जो gift है, it's a very sacred gift, your intuition, because if it loses its sacredness, then it will become a cup holder of your biases instead of your intuition. Okay? So there is one way in which Einstein or all the scientists have visions and imaginations and intuitive flashes, but they were always challenging, and whatever flashes they had, that was put to test by the leading theories of that era, by the most critical frameworks of that era. And when it's, again, just like tradition, when these flashes stood the test of that time, that is when those theory yielded to some principles, etc., which then govern the leading technology and physics of the day. But agar ye nahi hota, if you do not have these two things adding together, working in tandem, then you have your biases, and then your faithful servant doesn't stay faithful anymore, it becomes like a monster or a Frankenstein monster, which is like, you know, a self-fulfilling prophecy of disaster. ये समझ में आया? This is what you have to think about it. Okay, every great discovery begins with the question that logic alone could not have generated, yet every great discovery earns its place only by surviving the discipline of reason. Intuition imagines the impossible and logic determines the truism in it. Okay, yeah, Sherlock Holmes intuitions, correct. Okay, this topic also you should read खुद से पूरा, ठीक है, from the model answer, and it will give you a lot of these interesting thinkers, interesting scientists, and interesting examples, both from practical and historical dimension. Now we come to the section B, and we pick up the first topic. The idol is in the stone before the sculptor arrives. Batao, what examples come to your mind when you think of this? The idol is in the stone before the sculptor arrives. I'll give you an example, a way to think about it. Pick up a stone and give that stone to different kind of people. Okay, give that stone to a miner, give that stone to, let's say, Michelangelo, give that stone to someone in ORN, and think of what they will do to the stone. Okay, so if I think of it this way, then tell me, is the idol already in the stone? Or is it my vision or a sculptor vision or someone's vision which is getting manifested in that stone? When I talk about this, then I'm bringing this topic to a very practical level, wherein I'm basically asking कि भाई वो किस हर आदमी अपना सत्य जिएगा, right? Everyone will live their own truth. तो sculptor already has a truth. You are assigning a higher value as a society to an idol, right? But you look at it from a stone's angle, a big rock, right? Someone who's into the mining and operations will just look at it as like different constituents of minerals and whatever, and potential of the market value of whatever it is that he's mining. तो उसका अलग perspective होगा. Someone who's in the Christian kingdom will have a different perspective. तो इधर मत ले जाना एकदम से, ठीक है? I'll just read the chats, right? So this thing, elevate it to a higher level if you can. That the essence of something is already in that, ठीक है? You are not adding any value to it. The only addition or the only karta bhav or the only thing that you do on top of it is just removing the dross. Dross matlab removing the moss or removing the extra thing that I've added, and then you reveal the true thing which is inside. This is obviously debatable that what is the true thing, etc, etc, but इसपे तुम छोड़ सकते हो, ठीक है? So therefore don't get just stuck to the idol and sculptor here, वरना बहुत छोटा हो जाएगा ऐसे. Take a higher leap here. So क्या क्या लिखा लोगों ने? Good is already there, we just need to cut the noise. Correct, we have to reduce negative thoughts. That is a manifestation for your internal journey. Yes, when a mentor coaches a person with natural aptitude for a sport. True. Also, if you want to bring it to this practical level, then if you come to meet me or any mentor who's had experience, then I will first try to understand who you are rather than giving you, let's say, this model answer. That is why one-on-one mentorship works. Because I try to understand who you are as a person, and there is an exam that you need to crack. What subject should you harp more on this? और कितनी potential है तुम्हारे पे इसका maximum ले जाने में? अगर नहीं है, then I will ask you to cut your losses here and invest your time somewhere else, right? So in this way, I am understanding you and what it takes you to be a ranker, rather than adding my own versions of, hey, a ranker should be like this. समझ में आ रहा है? Chandragupta guided by Chanakya was not this case. Chanakya molded Chandragupta in his own light. ठीक है, तो ये वो वाला केस नहीं है. Reflection, yes. Cool, awesome. So you get it, right? The mark of a true statesman is the ability to see the final monument while looking at a parallel. Correct. So this is how you will think of examples and you will put in these slants. Okay. So you have to treat creation as a recognition of what that material can become, which is what Vallabhbhai Patel his imagination is. And these are like good examples. Whenever a historian, whenever a leader or a thinker or a political person thinks of how this thing can transform for good or bad, right? Both the examples. That is when you bring it to the realm of the sculptor. And this guy is saying that, I imagine that the true essence of this country or this space or, the next or the future is this. And that is where it's my agency that I'm acting like this. Okay? if I argue this thing on the other side, I would say that truth is always seeking its fulfillment, right? So that famous Rumi quote that what you are seeking is seeking you. And if let's say you're seeking the truth, then truth is also seeking you. And truth, or that ultimate reality, is always going to pick the right people or the right block of individuals to help forward the cause. This is the way in which I talk about that, the real is rational, the rational is real, or the creator creates or it gets created. ये वाले दो टॉपिक आ चुके हैं PYQ में, which you should remember back. This essay can be done much more beautifully if you have the right reflection. Okay, now little bit technical things on this. Possibility can precede recognition. ठीक है, if something already exists, then वो आपके recognition की मोहताज नहीं है. ठीक है, yet your recognition is what is going to get that thing into the temporal space. ये समझ में आ रहा है? If there's something already out there, truth which is already out there, is truth regardless of whether you found it or not. If there's an idol inside a rock, then it's there. I mean, theoretically it's there. Okay? But it's up to me or the space and time or the society that lives in, which will give rise to that certain value. Same example is for values like democracy. They were not eternally encoded in this way, the way we know. But the physical manifestation of it, how to run a democratic society, what are the other institutions that you have to make together, that is because of the agency of a certain kind of people and a certain kind of orientation. Okay? So possibility हमेशा exist करती है, but recognition is what we bring to the table. Do you understand this? Try to understand the slants with which we go. All the words and all the quotes and all the examples you'll get in the model answers, but try to put your mind in this plane of thinking. Okay? Try to navigate in these twin possibilities or two things which go hand in hand. Otherwise, अभी तक की लाइफ has only taught you how to live in binaries. ये अच्छा है, ये बुरा है, ये पहले होता है, ये बाद में होता है, ये ध्यान देना है, ये नहीं देना है, etc. etc. Am I making sense to people on chat? If you want to have a more tangible example, it's like the electricity already existed, right? The possibility of electricity was already there. It's just that few people, harnessed the technology and then brought it to life. Correct? So I can say that the idol or the electricity was already there in our living world. It's just that the sculptor bought it. So this is about, imagination alone doesn't give you a lot. Execution matters, and then you talk about the Wright brothers and their fancies of flights. When you dwell into topics like this, you get to know discovery versus innovation, discovery versus creation, actually, Ritika, on that note. Creation often involves revealing relationships of forms that were previously hidden from human perspectives. ठीक है, same way जैसे electricity का example थे, ऐसे ही the mathematical structure of planetary motion, it existed before Kepler described it in as many words. Plato's ideas of knowledge as form of recollection offers very, very early philosophical thought around this. Okay? But then you ask a much more important question: who decides that the idol was already there in the stone rather than being created by the sculptor imagination? Who says these things? That something was already inherent. That possibility was already there in a particular block of stone or in a particular society. कौन कहता है ये? तो इस पे बहुत सारे philosophers बहुत अलग अलग चीज़ें कहते हैं. एक बंदा कहता है कि यार ये तो आपकी retrospective जुमला है. ठीक है. We basically discover the reality. We kind of co-create the reality. There is nothing already out there and then you go in a time and then create it. It's like almost co-creating the thing. There's a very famous philosopher. Aristotle and Plato में difference क्या था? Has any of you read Plato and Aristotle? What was the difference between these two people? And they were teachers and disciples, right? Plato was a teacher of Aristotle. Where did Aristotle diverge from what Plato stood for? Yes, Himanshu, but what is it that Plato said? Or Socrates said? Plato and Socrates also go hand in hand. I think they said something to this account. They said golden mean, but not just that. Then, correct me if I'm wrong, but Aristotle said that the essence of whatever it is inherent in that thing. And Plato said it's out there. Okay, the forms are out there. And Aristotle said, ऐसे problem हो जाएगी. Because a brown chair, then you will say there is a essentially brown chair. और essence of brown and essence of chair, how do they meet? तो ऐसा नहीं है. The essence of something is contained within that thing. This thing out here is not inert. It's not, you don't trivialize. He brought practicality, right? So golden mean and all these things that you're writing is basically practical stuff, right? He brought everything right to the plane of existence, correct? Yet he did not divest it with the sacredness. Sacredness नहीं हटाई, but ये बोला कि आपको नजरिया चाहिए. You have to have a certain perspective to look into the core of a thing. That's what Aristotle said, right? हाँ. World of form, world of ideas within the world. Right, so I'm right, correct. I remember, fine. This is another way to go into topics like these. And that's why Plato and Aristotle are interesting figures to study. Most of these, I think there's a line somewhere I read that, the whole of Western philosophy are footnotes to Plato. Because they heavily derive from what Plato was talking about. They might differ from him, but Plato is like the god of everything, the great grandfather, so as to say, including Nietzsche. He also, reads Plato a lot and then picks up some things and, criticizes some things and builds on top of that. In fact, when you read philosophy, you will realize there are two kinds of philosophers. One who give a system to think through. Just like Hegel gave a system. That's a system which we follow in TAS. Okay, with the thesis, antithesis, synthesis framework. And then there's some philosophers who come and they destroy the system. They will not give you answers, but they will destroy, they will poke hole in the armors, they will destroy and say that ultimately this also fails. So if you think that system works, it's because of the temporal utility of it. You can use it, but do not say that it's the be all end all of life. That's exhibit A is Nietzsche. ठीक है, उन्होंने कोई सिस्टम नहीं दिया, बट उन्होंने सबकी बैंड बजाई है. ठीक है. What else do you think you can talk about in this essay? The idol is in the stone before the sculptor arrives. That's a great point. That Aristotle would say that idol was already latent in the stone, waiting for only the actuality of it. And Sartre would counter that no idol precedes the sculpture's chisel. Existence precedes essence. Right? So existentialist philosophers will completely go against this statement. They will say that I am the author of my destiny and I am writing my... In that case, I am free, but I am also full of anxiety, etc., etc. By the way, how many of you are here and you are not able to go through this philosophical reflection? मतलब किस को problem आ रही है? Write down the problems, or you can DM me कि कहाँ पे फंसते हो. Because I'm, as much as I can, I'm trying to have stories around these things, and I give you enough context of those philosophers or the times that they lived in via these essays, so that the most practical aspect is that you can use them in the essay. That's the most practical thing. The second practical aspect is that you can see these things, these dimensions around in the life that you live in, and then spend some time in understanding the theory also, so that you have some weight, when you put it out on the paper. So, इसके बाद the synthesis of this essay, or the other points of this essay will be more on society and human side. What is it that we choose to get created? That's a huge responsibility on us. So if you think from the existentialist side, so existentialists will say that there is no such thing as a truth waiting to be discovered, and you are just the conduit या निमित्त मात्र ही हो तुम, बस कि जो वहाँ पे तुम जाके बस ठोका पीटी कर दे रहे हो, and you have, oh wow, we have a nuclear weapon now. ऐसा नहीं है. Don't give in to this bullshit that that reality of nuclear warfare was just ready out there to be discovered by a certain scientist, in America. That's not the case. The responsibility lies on the scientist. The scientist, the discoverer, the inventor cannot offload that responsibility to the society. And that's what ate at Oppenheimer's head, when he realized the potential of what he has created. That's what concerned Alfred Nobel, right, when he read that obituary, because suddenly he had that existentialist thought, ki, I can't be remembered for this, I don't want to be remembered for this, and I cannot alienate myself from my creation and my, how I want to be remembered. So then let me just make amends. Okay, problematic to integrate such thinkers. It's okay to not be able to integrate thinkers at this stage, but just understand ki these reflections should come easy to you. Try to, I would say, divest these thinkers of the platforms that you've given them ki, kya socha in logon ne, wo hatao. They think, you will find them very commonsensical when you get the context of the space and time that they were living in. Also, a good way to understand Western philosophy is to know इस thinker ने ये बोला था, and then someone came and contradicted or built on top of that. So you will get a sense of sequence to how thoughts fine-tuned or went back or came with extra stuff to the future. And it's hard to start there, and I know a lot of us do not give time to philosophy back in college. So for 27 folks, I'll try to do this. I'll try to make lecture videos on just the good thinkers of our time and try to marry it with the PYQs from ethics and essays, so that you're never lost. I mean, I'll try to see as much as I can help on that. Okay, so the crescendo of this essay topic has to be that it's not that a truth is just somehow neutrally lying there waiting to be uncovered. It is the responsibility and also the agency of the society, people, and the time that decides what needs to get created from the raw material that is the world out there. And in this way, you can move beyond just the stone and the sculptor. You can say that rivers and all other natural, इसमें तुम natural सारे mediums या natural sciences इनको ले लेना और देखना कि यार that responsibility is a heavy burden. ठीक है? Every society, every institution, and every individual carries untapped possibilities waiting to be recognized. But possibilities alone changes nothing. Those possibilities have to be mediated by the ethics and the ways of life of that age and era that we live in. Okay? And then the sculptor doesn't have to be a third party coming to you. You have to decide and take yourself into the future. You have to usher yourself into the future. Like I say, every topic which you find has relevance to an individual has relevance across society, nation, and other things. Okay? And every topic which talks about the external life, kaise karna chahiye, vagara vagara, can be inverted and brought back into how you should live your internal life. Okay? These are two very important slants to understand. Okay, which topic do you want me to do next? One is power that must be proven is already lost. Or the other is a truth no one can hear is not yet a truth. I think a truth no one can hear is not yet a truth is similar to this topic one, in terms that you can now write better answers to that. Let's do the second topic. Power that must be proven. Power that must be proved is already lost. Oh man, it's an interesting theme. The theme of power, the theme of force versus influence. So tell me, ab itna sun liya hai, what are your early thoughts on this? I'll just tab tak write down interesting words that I hope you've noted these things down. I mean, I obviously would recommend that you guys should attend these sessions live. There is absolutely no replacement for this. YouTube पे बहुत content है. I don't know, you can really never know कि उस time पे तुम किस side के videos, किस thumb के clickbaity creation पे जाके click करके निकल जाओगे. अभी के अभी जो लिख सकते हो लिख लो. We live in an age of information inundation and not information asymmetry. अभी कोई asymmetry नहीं है. We just need to be very aware of the momentum that we are in, right? So your whole day will not go in the same focused manner. Try to spend time with group of people जिसमें तुम्हारा momentum बना रहे, you are in the right speed, you're alert, etc., etc. And because with due credit to the ADHD riddled brains that we have, the only reason why I give a lot of quotes and give a lot of these interesting hacks is just to keep you guys engaged. Otherwise, I would love to just go into the theories and reflective zones, but I cannot have you all come with me on that. So when सोचो इसके बारे में, power that must be proved is already lost. Interesting things यहाँ पे ये होंगे. This topic is all about legitimacy, how you retain your legitimacy. Okay. And if you just have to leave this video with just one or two lines for this topic, it is this, that for actions which have happened in the past because of your ignorance, let's say you are a ruler. Okay, and you've been ruling with whatever, a mix of iron hand and influence, both things together, but certain revolutionaries did something. जैसे कि मान लो यहाँ पे protest हो गई CJP की या किसी की, right? And now if you're in the power, you have two ways, right? One, you show your force, or other you show your influence. Whatever you do, your only criteria of giving a green signal to whatever action you do is कि what will ensure my legitimacy stays for the longest possible time. Okay? That's the only criteria that you have to hedge against. So for actions which have happened in the past, your legitimacy can still hang in back, your legitimacy can still be extended if you act on influence, if you do things which are heavy on the influence side of things. You talk, you parlay, वगैरह वगैरह, जैसे the minister eventually resigned, right? But for things that have yet not come to pass, and if you can foresee a certain revolution or a certain discontent arising, you can do some show of power. Okay, I'll not go into the political side of things right now, but if you know what I'm saying in terms of how nations show power, that is with the exercises. You have these all drills and army drill and air force drill and navy drill and whatnot, right? So deterrence is actually what you can show there. So Max Weber, again a thinker that PSIR folks would know, वो distinguish करता है between legitimate authority versus coercive domination. I am just, and thinkers also just do these tricks. They qualify their words. Okay, they qualify these things. They could have also said domination, but this is now coercive. Legitimate authority. अब authority legitimate illegitimate हो गई. Now he'll write more theories on this. तो तुमको ऐसे ही words use करने अपने essay के उसमें, ठीक है? The collapse of Soviet Union demonstrates that decades of coercive institutional power cannot infinitely substitute for legitimate or political legitimacy. Angad took back his leg. Ah, yes. So you can use these interesting. Angad here is the main hero, right? He knew कि बाकी सब में तो है नहीं हिम्मत, but he will not allow Ravan to try it, and he, retreats very gracefully. और उसमें भी उसने अपना व्यंग छोड़ दिया कि if you have to touch the feet, do it of Lord Ram. That's great. Suez crisis, Britain using military force to hide its collapsing imperial authority. Yeah. So you have all these things where power. So I trust you guys. You'll give enough examples of when the show of power went right, when it went wrong. But a wise leader is someone who understands, who has full awareness of his possibility. Yet he or she doesn't leave the fight. So he arms with all the things, all the tactics he has, right? So in the case of Angad, जो example हिमांशु ने दिया है, उसकी स्ट्रेंथ थी, ही न्यू 10 लोगों तो हरा ही देगा, वो तो नहीं हटा पाएंगे, बट ही न्यू कि भाई रावण से ऊपर तो नहीं है वो. सो देन ही कम्स अप विद व्हाट यू कैन कॉल एज अ वॉर ऑफ विट्स और सम काइंड ऑफ अ रेपार्टी और समथिंग लाइक दैट, अनदर क्या होता है कला, वाक पटुता, जिसको आई डोंट नो उसको इंग्लिश में क्या बोलोगे, बट ही यूज दैट. ठीक है. हैना आरेंट का बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग, Ritika, if you can explain and elaborate, I'm missing the beat on that. But she actually makes a very fine distinction between what is violence. It's not the power, it's the people, something around that, right? And a lot of political thinkers will say that, the raw power I can see coming and I can make my ways of, escaping that, the raw, blunt, brute power. But the moment you've controlled the psyche of people and you've flipped a certain category of a certain, group of people against the country or against a certain cause, that's like a very weird kind of violence that you would inflict then. Cool. So this essay, I gave you the thing, right? This essay, power that must be proved is already lost, are the kind of essays in force versus influence where you show what is the stage, how do brute force work alongside with hidden influences. And there's an element of time in this, right? Brute force can give you instant victory, but can also, they sow the seeds of long-term discontent. Whereas influence, they will not grant you instant victory, but whatever victory they do grant you will stay for longer, right? And that is the case for both diplomacy and war and brute war. And so these things have to be wielded in the right way by a king, a ruler. And this essay question has to be written on the side of this. And then in this thing, you can slowly go into how India manages the crisis, how we managed oil crisis, how we manage our border disputes, how we manage our, despite not having a seat in the council, we manage the issues and UN, vagera, vagera. How do we parlay between these things? You can put in those quotes ki in diplomacy, they're no permanent friends, but permanent interest in all these things. In this way, you can show facets of power. Again, Foucault को भी बुला सकते हो, biological power is a term he coined. But jargons throw करने के अलावा, try to take people through a journey of how power works. ठीक है? How it should be proven, but that is to prevent a future damage. ठीक है, ऐसा नहीं है कि you should never show your power, but you should always have that mystic element, the X factor, when you do show that. You should not play your whole hand completely. What was the killing of Jarasandh? How does that come here, Vishwas? Oh yeah, Ritika, you're right. Power belongs to people. This is Hannah Arendt saying power belongs to people coming together and participating together, whereas violence belongs to a totalitarian state to gain control over masses. Vishwas, I doubt if I can get you unmuted. I'm on a different camera. But I hope you get this sense. Okay. Again, the way you can combine this topic with the first topic of the day that we discussed, or the second topic of the day, that paralysis and patience wear the same face, you can take a leaf from there that restraint is meaningful only when it's backed by capacity. If you have nothing to show for and you're just showing a patient face, then you were just delaying your annihilation. Or you can just succumb and might as well just ask for forgiveness. क्योंकि the moment the other side catches a bluff, वो तिगुना लगान लेगा तुमसे, ठीक है? So the one-liner that you should leave this essay would something be like this: sometimes power must be demonstrated precisely to prevent its use. That's what we do when we do these drills. Okay, this is the only future use case that power should be demonstrated. Okay, structures or authoritative on the right side, authoritative rules are built so that the inevitable brutality doesn't come to pass. So there are levels and stages of deterrence given. This you should understand as a statesman in the making. Okay? The Cold War's nuclear deterrence depended on demonstrating enough capability to make direct confrontation irrational. I think there is a famous line by Sun Tzu also that you should appear, and that's why appearances and to a certain level PR and all these machineries, they matter. The whole point of writing essays, or the whole point of such interesting reflective essays, is that there's no such thing as good and bad. That thing inherently contains its own contradiction. That's the beauty of this TAS framework. One thesis that you bring to me, or that essay topic asks you, inherently contains the antithesis. In the sense, you cannot separate it that easily, but you can see it for what it is. So PR machinery के बहुत फायदे भी हैं, but then if you let it go unchecked, बहुत नुकसान भी हैं. And so a synthesis has to be a higher reality which comes into existence, or a third factor, or a higher vision, which makes it imperative for you to manage it with full awareness. And that's the same with human mind and human potential and the human psyche that you carry, right? You carry your own antithesis all along. And so the only thing that prevents you in your attempt and in life is that if you're alert. So that's why in the postmodern discourses, when we say that, I have my own truth. Yes, you very well have your own truth, and your own truth will become your own liability. So it's much, much better that you can bounce off your truths with your friends and people you can trust, so that at least the sum total or the average of you guys is still moving towards a higher truth, or a higher fleshing out of truth, or more fine-tuning your own biases. And that's the only way to grow and keep growing, right? So you can still take the recourse of, no, I'll start with my own truth, do hell with the ultimate truths which people preach. That's fine, but make sure you have enough checks and balances in the system that you don't stagnate at this level. ठीक है, power का भी यही rule है. So you should have a council of wise people around you. You should not just get waylaid by your own ideas and your own delusions of grandeur. Have this whole council and work with it. Preparation का भी यही तरीका है. Mentorship का भी यही तरीका है. In fact, and therefore, just studying in silo, studying from YouTube, studying from books alone can only work if you're already a very high order synthesized person. फिर तो तुम ORN क्या, फिर तो पहाड़ों में जाके पढ़ाई कर लेनी चाहिए, किताबें सारी लेके, और एक सिर्फ एग्जाम दिन दिल्ली आओ और फिर वापस पहाड़ों पे मसूरी. फिर तो दैट्स द इवेंचुअल रियलिटी. वो भी बढ़िया है. ठीक है, सो दिस इज इट. आई ड्रॉप दिस PDF on the letter and spirit group because this I'm doing in public. The other things I'll drop in the Smash essay cohort. Cool. Are there any questions from the group? Are there any questions from the 2027 people, जितने भी बचे हैं? People who are part of the Smash Essay 27 and UAP 27 program, I'll start the essay classes soon. This time I'll also take good parts of the ethics, because there are a lot of overlaps now. And I think you do better to learn these two things together. But good, I don't think there are any questions. Have a good day, guys, and for those who are writing 26, best of luck.